Thanks for tuning in to watch The Ordinary Filmmaker. It's Tuesday, December the 28th, 2021, and I've got some really exciting news for Nikon Z9 owners. But before I do, a little bit of a public service announcement. On December the 23rd, an email went out to Nikon NPS members that had purchased the Z9, letting them know that it has started shipping pre-orders. However, if you have pre-ordered with a retailer, make sure you submit your Nikon or your NPS information through the Nikon dashboard, because if you haven't, well, you might wait a little longer than normal. You see, Nikon is prioritizing those that pre-ordered that are NPS members. And now for the big news. If you did get a notification that your Nikon Z9 has shipped, or maybe you're lucky to wake up today and somebody knocks on your door with a Nikon Z9, it's most likely going to come with Firmware 1.0. Nikon just issued a news release, and in it they state that we are pleased to announce the release of Firmware 1.10 for the flagship mirrorless camera, the Nikon Z9, on January the 5th, 2022 at 1500 hours. Now you'll notice that the language there was off a little bit. It didn't sound like it was polished very well. And that's because it's a translation using Google Translate. You see, it's just after midnight, and all we have right now is the Japanese news release from Nikon Japan. So do bear with me, as this is coming from Google Translate directly from Nikon Japan's news release. So what are we getting in this firmware update? Well, one of the issues that people are noticing, those that are testing it, those that are lucky enough to have it in their hands, if you're shooting continuous 20 frames per second RAW and you just hold down that trigger, you're going to get about 20 frames per second. But if you're splitting between RAW and JPEG, so JPEG Basic, JPEG Fine, both large, or JPEG Basic size S, it takes about, well, 3.8 seconds to do about 20 frames. With a new firmware update, it's going to drop that down to about 2 seconds, so almost half the time. Now, what about for those video folks looking for 8K at 60 frames per second? I wonder how many of you out there are looking for. Let me know in the comment section down below, is 8K 60 something that's really sold you on this camera, something you're going to be using a lot that you're excited about? Or if you just shoot 8K in general and you plan on using 8K 60 for slow motion. Now, one thing it did mention in the firmware update, and again, this is a translation, so what it seems like they're saying is, and I quote here from the translated, in addition, we plan to add various video functions and improve operability and shooting functions when shooting stills, images, and video. And that sounds really, really good. But they say in future firmware updates. So it doesn't sound like we're going to get a lot of enhancements in this firmware update in terms of video. After all, it is a 1.1. It's not like it's a 2.0. But still, I wonder, will we get any video capabilities? Will they sneak in 8K 60? It's really hard to say. It's one of the problems with dealing with a translation. You don't always know. Some of these words could be, let me take a look at it again. In addition, we plan to add various, now it could still be in this firmware update, we plan to add various video functions and improve operability and functions when shooting stills, images, and video in future firmware updates. Okay, so they're definitely planning a whole lot more in future firmware updates, and this doesn't really surprise me. I've had the Canon EOS R5 for about 1.5 years now. And when it first came out, it was plagued, as I'm sure you're aware of, with many problems. Well, really one major problem, that was overheating. But in every major firmware update since, from 1.1, 1.1.1 to 1.2 to 1.3, 1.4, and now at 1.5, they've added many capabilities to the video specs that have just really changed how I shoot with this camera. I used to fight with it shooting in log, and it was just driving me up the wall. But now with Canon Log 3, with better heating and cool down times, the ability to record video to both card slots at the same time, the point I'm trying to get to is that it's really improved the capabilities of the camera. This is not like 3 or 4 years ago where if you bought a Nikon or Canon camera, you might get a firmware update, but it wasn't going to add any additional functionality or enhancements. It was more or less just going to fix bugs. That's where I think we're going to see differences in the Nikon Z9, as we did with the Canon cameras coming out, the R5 and the R6. I think we're going to see a lot of improvements to the Nikon Z9 and, of course, increased capabilities. And the two capabilities I'm really looking forward to seeing is 8K 60, but also the ability to record, and I'm going to pause for a dramatic effect here, the ability to record in Apple ProRes 422. I mean, that's amazing. It saves an awful lot of time. I wish Canon would do that. I wish others would do that too. To get that in the camera without having to use some sort of external recorder like the Ninja 5, that's really, really impressive. So yeah, no, I had trouble sleeping. That's it for the news. I'm just going to go into a sort of behind the scenes because I haven't had a chance to do one in a while. So if you just came here for the news, feel free to leave. I'm just going to ramble on incoherently at times. I'm looking forward to this firmware update, and I'm surprised we're getting it so quickly after they've started shipping. I think by the time January the 5th rolls along, which isn't going to be that far away, it's about a week away, most people still won't have their Nikon Z9s. But again, if you do have your Nikon Z9 and the firmware comes, if you're not doing a lot of high-speed shooting, you might want to wait a week or two just to make sure there aren't any other bugs in it that could cause you problems. And it's rare. Normally these things go off without a hitch. But last year, Canon provided, I think it was firmware update 1.3 to the R6, and it basically bricked it for several minutes. You had to pull the battery and do a few things, and eventually would get working again. And they pulled that firmware almost immediately and issued another one. So it's rare that these things do happen, but if you don't need the new capabilities, read the release notes when they do issue it. And if you don't need those capabilities right away, hold off, wait a week or two. Usually within a week, if anything bad happens, we'll more than find out through this channel, through Nikon Rumors, through the news, through Digital Camo World, Petapixel, you name it, the news is going to get out there. I mean, look what happened with Canon when they released the R5 and you had that overheating warning. I mean, that was just ridiculous, wasn't it? The Nikon Z9, I'm still enamored by this camera. I'm really excited to see how it performs in 4K, 8K, 8K 60. I'm going to be upgrading my computer soon where I'll be able to publish videos in 8K without issue. And what I'm really looking to see is, things like 4K 120, for example. It sounds great. But you see, that's a capability. What I'm looking for is detailed 4K 120. Now, my R5 does 4K 120 too, and it really is amazing, but it's soft. When you're shooting 120 frames per second in 4K full sensor readout, the camera's having to do an awful lot of work, so you really need a really fast processor, sensor, bus, everything going right to the card. So I'm really curious to see if the Nikon Z9 beats the R5 and the Alpha One when it comes to 4K 120. Is it more detailed? And the same with regular 4K, and the same with 8K. And when we do 8K 60, what is the detail going to be like? I really do wish I could get one of these cameras on this channel when it comes out, but I've been unable to reach Nikon Canada to try and reach out to them to try and communicate in any way whatsoever. Even through my local camera store, it's hard to get a hold of anybody, but I really do wish I could get the Nikon Z9 in here because, wow, it's going to be a video powerhouse. I know it's a stills hybrid camera. I know it's all about fast action and sports, but come on, 8K 60? 8K 30 frames per second, Apple ProRes 422, 4K 120. This is a beast of a machine. And I'm sorry, but I prefer stills hybrid cameras for video. I love the interchangeability of the lens. I love that you've got a full solid stills camera behind it, and you can get some really amazing cinema cameras, but when it comes to stills, no, you have to buy a stills camera and a video camera, and I'm not that big enough where I can afford to do both. So having a camera that can easily switch between each is really amazing to me, and that's why I still like stills hybrid cameras. Nikon Z9. If you have pre-ordered it, wow. If you have pre-ordered it and you got an email from Nikon stating that, hey, we've started shipping these, congratulations. If it has shown up, let me know in the comment section down below as well. But also, as I said at the very beginning of this video, if you went ahead and pre-ordered it through a retailer and you haven't put in your NPS information through the Nikon dashboard, go ahead and do so. Otherwise, your position in the pre-order is going to get bumped until NPS members are satisfied. And this is part of what Nikon is doing for its NPS members. You pay a certain amount of money every month, depending on what level you're at. And one of those perks is you get the camera first. So if you're an NPS member, you definitely want to go ahead and put that information in your Nikon dashboard. And if you aren't an NPS member and you're pre-ordered, you might want to go ahead and get your NPS and help speed this along a little bit. I have no idea how many they're making a month. Previous stories said they're producing about 2,500 cameras every month, and they've been doing so for about 4 months now. But that only brings us to about 10,000 cameras, and this camera is in high demand. And I know this because I saw the same thing with Canon. Both Nikon and Canon have been very, very slow to the mirrorless world. Yes, there's the Nikon Z6, Z7, the Z6 Mark II, and the Z7 Mark II, the Z5. I get it, but these are not professional grade cameras. If you're a professional and you're shooting with a D6, you're shooting with a D850, whatever it is, you're shooting on that high end, you're not going to pick up a Z6 or Z7 in most cases. You're waiting to see what Nikon is going to do with the Z9 or with the Z1, whatever it was going to be, we don't know. But now that we have the Z9 out there, it's a huge improvement over the D6 and over other previous DSLRs that it's going to pull a lot of people that have been waiting for Nikon to come out with something really, really amazing, and it's delivered something really, really amazing. So a lot of people are going to move from the D3, the D4, the D5, and the D6, and this is their new flagship mirrorless camera. So it's not just people that are upgrading from the Z6 and Z7, and yes, people are doing that. It's not just people that are coming back to Nikon that have kept their glass, their F-mount glass, that are saying, you know, I'm glad I never sold off my glass. I'm coming back. I don't like brand X. I'm really looking forward to coming back to Nikon. And this is really, really exciting. I know how you felt because for 3 years, I looked at moving off Canon because I just was not happy with the camera bodies they were putting out there. They were so lagging the competition, and yes, that was Sony. Nikon didn't have anything I wanted. Panasonic, I was waiting to see if their GH5 would fix the autofocus. And I was waiting for Sony for the A7S III, so this A7S III just seemed to go nowhere until it finally came out. After we started getting these continuous leaks of the R5, that's when Sony finally said, oh yeah, the A7S III is coming out in a couple of months. But by then, the R5 seemed really, really interesting. It was a lot more than I wanted to spend for a camera, but it allowed me to take all my expensive glass and keep it. The cost of getting the R5 was actually a lot cheaper than switching over to Sony and having to sell off my glass and, you know, take a bit of a hit for it. Like that, the EF 50mm f1.2 that I spent about $2,000 for, when I sold it used, it was $600 or 400 US. 600 Canadian I got for that. And the RF lens at the time was selling for around, what, 2,300 US? So it's very expensive to switch platforms, and not many of us can afford to do that. So I'm really happy for you. You're getting your Nikon Z9 soon, especially if you've pre-ordered it and you haven't pre-ordered it. You're still thinking, you're waiting on the reviews to see how Tony Northrup or Deeper Review or Fro Knows do some more in-depth on production models with the production firmware, or you're waiting to see how they perform with Firmware 1.1. Yeah, I don't blame you. It's not a cheap camera, but, you know, looking back on the R5 and all the problems it had at the beginning, you know, I don't regret it in any way whatsoever. It's really taken my game up from where I used to be. I started with a hobbyist camera. I shot this channel with the Canon 70D, which is right behind me. And the R5, I'm still learning how to use it, but I'm producing far better content. Oh, and one last thing before you go, please like and subscribe. It really does help this channel grow. And your subscribes, I really take them as a virtual pat on the back and appreciate them. But that's it for now. It's late. It's almost 1 o'clock. I need to get this out to you. Yeah, have yourself a great week if you're off. Have yourself a great new year. And thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.